We have Councilmember Parks joining me for the Jobs and Business Retention Committee, so we have a quorum. With that, we'd like to start the meeting and ask for item number 1.
Item number 1 is a motion, Alarcon Garcetti, relative to the request for various entities for a report to the Jobs and Business Development Committee in 30 days with a proposal to make the restaurant industry more competitive with the food trucks and to grow the number of restaurants and increase the sales of new and existing restaurants.
Okay, do we have the CLA? Are they?
I'll be representing the CLA, yes.
Okay, go ahead and make the report.
Well, we're actually here to hear the motion. We don't have a formal report yet.
Okay. Okay, this motion is simply, it's my motion. It's calling for a report. Just for the purposes of discussion, we have seen a number of activity related to food trucks over the years, and it's really been a challenge for anybody who's been on the city council in the last 20 years and probably longer to deal with the issue of food trucks. The reason I introduced this motion is because most recently we've seen a growth in what are now called gourmet food trucks, and as a result, the restaurant industry has seen literally a cultural shift to where and the people driving this cultural shift are actually the customers. And the customers are saying they actually enjoy going to food trucks, and particularly now we have a community that previously, in my mind, and these are my words, this isn't based on study, we see a community that in the past was anti food trucks or troqueros, and now many of the same communities that were opposed to food trucks are saying we enjoy going to gourmet food trucks. And so we're seeing a sort of, as I said, a cultural shift in the customer base, but that has also driven a shift in the position of the restaurant association. And having served for 17 years, I can tell you that there's been a radical shift from the restaurant association. Before it was we're opposed to food trucks in all cases, and now they're saying no, we got to figure this out. We got to work so that brick and mortar restaurants aren't negatively impacted by food trucks. At the same time, recognizing that food trucks have established their place, and it's actually a dominant place in many communities throughout Los Angeles. And so this is since it appears that we are not going to be able to stop, the old method 20 years ago, 15 years ago was just cite the food truck and they pay the thing, but they're still around. They're not going to go away. And so the question is, how can we make them exist and also deal with the other aspect, which is this motion is intended to deal with, and that is, if in fact food trucks are establishing and the costs of doing business are much far less than the cost of doing business in a brick and mortar restaurant, then are there certain ways that we can balance the challenges for the brick and mortar restaurants so that they can have peaceful coexistence with the food and truck vendors. So this is intended to see what kinds of incentives and inducements can we have for brick and mortar restaurants, which, by the way, without, again, I don't have statistics to back this up, but I think it's common knowledge that we are losing brick and mortar restaurants left and right in Los Angeles during this economy. As much, I've heard statistics from 30% across the board to much higher in specific communities, and so this is something that we have to address, and I'm pleased to address it in this committee. So what this motion is intended to do is ask the CLA to work with the Office of Finance, the Chief Administrative Officer, in collaboration with the California Restaurant Association, the Neighborhood Council, the business community, and report back to and by the way, by the business community, I do mean both brick and mortar restaurants and to the extent that it makes sense, the food truck folks as well. I think they may have some good ideas on how to ameliorate the situation and make it more palatable for everybody. And so we definitely want all of those groups involved. That was the motion, and I do have a number of cards, so why don't I go ahead and take the cards, ask the CLA if you would just take copious notes, because I anticipate support for this, and then we would ask for the CLA to come back with a report. With that, we have Nicole Shahanian with the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, I'm here to support Councilmember Alarcon's motion. As you know, in recent months, we've seen a significant increase in mobile food vendors in Hollywood and areas throughout the city. Whereas these trucks used to concentrate on industrial areas where there was a lack of restaurant options, they have now moved into central Hollywood, parking adjacent to our existing restaurants. We've heard time and time again that these food trucks are siphoning off business for many Hollywood restaurants. Because they do not have the same overhead costs, these mobile trucks can undercut the city's existing restaurants. They literally roll in, take the business and our tax dollars, and leave. Meanwhile, many of the tenants who are already struggling to stay in Hollywood are seeing their revenue decline dramatically. Some restaurants have reported that if something isn't done, they will have to close down. Real estate brokers have been turned down by potential tenants citing proliferation of these trucks. To this end, the Hollywood Chamber supports the efforts of this committee to examine and renew its commitments to the brick-and-mortar restaurant industry. We hope that the committee will study strategies to attract, retain, and encourage new and existing restaurant businesses within the city of Los Angeles. These recommendations would be in the best interest of the city and will make the city more competitive with other jurisdictions and more business-friendly overall. The Chamber appreciates your leadership role in introducing this motion, and we encourage the Jobs and Business Development Committee to move quickly on the implementation of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Paul Scrivano? Scrivano, okay.
Forgive my appearance today. This was kind of last minute.
I'd rather be dressed like you.
You mentioned that this has been a problem for years and years, and frankly, when the trucks were truly mobile, there was never a problem. The trucks today are not mobile. In the restaurant industry, there's this thing called a day part, and there is a breakfast day part, a lunch day part, and a dinner day part. What's happening, in my case, I own restaurants. We have 4 in Councilmember Rosenthal's district, one of which Bernie was at a couple years ago, Councilmember Parks, and one I'm going to begin building in November. When you sit in front of a restaurant for an entire 2 or 3 hour period, you're not mobile. You're sitting there for an entire day part for that restaurant. My base opposition to the, quote, gourmet food trucks is their ability to perform commerce on public land. They're opening up a store in a public parking space in front of a brick and mortar, and what I see is the snowball of not only 1 truck in front of my store, but then 7, 8, 9, and 10 trucks in front of my store, and then the mobile dress shop and the mobile computer shop and the mobile bookstore and the mobile pet supply store, all parking in front of brick and mortar. And we're going to wind up in a situation where we have lots and lots of beautiful gourmet and boutique mobile trucks in front of boarded up brick and mortar shops. That's the logical progression of this thing if it's not stopped very soon. So it's basically an equal protection argument for me. I cannot just roll out tables and chairs on the sidewalk in front of my business. I can't just put extra refrigeration that I so desperately need in a truck in a parking space in front of my store. So I'm not really understanding their ability to perform retail commerce on public land with no implications at all. I think it should be private land only, by invitation only, construction site, entertainment facility, whatever it is, but you can't do commerce on public land.
Actually, I have one question for you. There is a synergy that occurs when there's a concentration of restaurants in a given area, and so as we craft, as we move in this direction, I don't know what exactly we're going to be crafting here, but as we move in this direction, I want to be mindful of the opportunities we may have to create synergy. So, for example, I went to a Menchie's, and right in front of it was a gourmet. It was a fancy restaurant. I forget which one. It was a fancy restaurant, but it was a gourmet. I think it was carne asada. And anybody that knows anything about carne asada, you eat carne asada, and you really want a Menchie's. I mean, so there may be things that we can do that are outside the box that actually create those synergies, and I don't want to exclude those possibilities. Because on the face of it, what you're saying, everybody's going to say, well, yeah, you can't compete with 11 restaurants, but you go to the mall and you'll see 20 restaurants in the same location, and they're all benefiting because of the concentration, because somebody wants to go and, my daughter might want to eat a hot dog, and my other daughter might want to eat a pizza, and I might want to eat a sandwich.
Right.
So I just want to be mindful of that. I understand your fundamental premise of the issue of public land, and that's a challenge, I think, mostly for the Transportation Committee, which I also serve on, and Tom LaBonge is vanguarding some issues over there. This is more to speak to business issues related to the brick and mortar restaurants. Okay, so just know that I don't want to step on anybody's toes in the Transportation Committee, but at the same time, I recognize what you're saying. But what I want to figure out is how can we benefit your company, even if you had to have food trucks in front of your house, in front of your restaurant. And there may be a way to do that. And I don't want to exclude that possibility.
And I come here with a spirit of cooperation. As a matter of fact, I took my main competitor with me, a brick and mortar guy around the corner from me, because we both suffer from the same problem. And when I talked to Sam, he was like, I'll join you.
Great.
We love competing with each other in front of the 2.5 million square feet of office space that we pay very dearly to be in front of.
Yeah.
So, and we became friends over this. So I'm not a competition guy like this.
Yeah.
I'm a lover, not a fighter. I want to see the solution to this, but someone, I think it was Jonathan Gold in the LA Weekly, said when you're suffering from competition, you run to regulation. This is not me running to regulation. This is me saying, I need equal protection.
Yeah.
I cannot perform commerce on public land. Therefore, why can someone else?
Actually, I think you've just captured the spirit of the motion. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, as opposed to going after regulation, which has been very frustrating in my tenure, to try and do something to balance the scales by increasing your opportunities as a brick and mortar restaurant owner. I think it's a better solution. But we also don't discount. We have some very good ideas, and some people are going to testify on the food truck side. In fact, they had requested an item on my agenda, but since I hadn't had the chance to sit down with them personally, I held it off. But there's some good ideas that they want to offer, and so let's keep our minds open on this, and I think we're going to find a better place.
And
thank you very much.
Of the expedited program, working with Building and Safety on the new restaurant we're going to do in West LA, it was a wonderful experience compared to the last one I did. It was like 3 years and gray hair. So
well, we're all glad to hear that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Lori Hughes. After Lori, we have Salvador Rodriguez, and you can please move to the front.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Hughes, and I'm Executive Director of Gateway 2 LA Business Improvement District, which is on Century Boulevard near LAX. I'm here today just to share our experience with the food truck phenomenon. It has been a huge boon for us. We, as you are probably aware, a lot of hotels and office buildings on Century Boulevard, and one of our main issues always since the inception of our bid is that there's not enough to do, not enough places to eat. The places that are there to eat are inside the hotels or the occasional cafe in the office buildings. And so with the advent of this gourmet food trucks, this was just huge. And we had one of our hotels step up and say, we'll let you use our parking lot. And even though they have a restaurant right there, and we do all we can to get the businesses from the office buildings into the hotels, we spend so much money trying to do that. But again, when the food truck phenomenon hit and we opened up a lot there, they gave us the tables, and we put out chairs and umbrellas, and the people just poured out of the buildings, and it's been a wonderful rejuvenation of for our area. And the trucks change each week, and the numbers just continue to grow. I have a blog here that was done by one of the food and beverage consultants for the Crowne Plaza Hotel, and a very interesting take on having 10 new restaurants open right next to your existing restaurant, and what it does for your business, and how much money we spend trying to attract new business into the area when this didn't cost us a thing. And every week they have 300 to 500 new people come in, and they get to expose their product to those people. So I know that other bids have different positions. Certainly we think it's a good idea to have grading system and to deal with the parking issues, but I appreciate you looking outside the box. I appreciate you considering and looking at ways to make this new business model thrive in the city of LA. Thank you. And I want to thank Marissa for coming to our bid consortium meetings. She's a great addition. We need her.
Thanks, Marissa. Sal Rodriguez? Salvador?
Sí. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Soy Salvador Rodríguez. Soy miembro de la Asociación de Loncheros de la Familia Unida de California.
My name is Salvador Rodriguez, and I'm a member of the Loncheros Association.
Yo tengo 22 años trabajando en el mismo lugar.
I've been working in the same area for the past 22 years as a lunch cook worker.
La ordenanza sobre las áreas a mí me afectaría bastante.
Any ordinance that implicates there being a zoning or a particular zoning for lunch trucks would negatively impact me.
Ya que desde ese tiempo que les dije 22 años atrás, he incluido a mi familia trabajando en mi lonchera.
Since like I mentioned before, I've been working in the same area for the past 22 years, and in this business, my family also works in.
Ahorita tengo 3 hijos en la universidad, 2 en Fullerton y
Right now, I have 3 kids in the university, 3 in
uno
Fullerton,
se acaba de ir a San Diego.
and 1 just left to San
De ahí,
Diego.
ese sostenimiento que he tenido yo.
And that's how I've been able to provide for my kids, for my sons.
Entonces siempre la nueva ordenanza a mí me afectaría bastante, ya que yo estoy de ahí dependiendo para el sostenimiento de mi familia en la universidad y en mi casa.
Any ordinance that would require for me to park at a particular zone would negatively impact me, since this is how I've been able to provide for my family and sustain ourselves.
Yo hasta ahorita estoy pagando todos los impuestos, las licencias que me requieren, las que me han pedido, estoy al corriente con todo.
As of now,
Y creo que estoy legalmente trabajando.
I've been paying for all the required certifications and permits, and I've been operating legally by what the law requires.
Eso es todo. Gracias.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I'm sorry, we have Aaron Glenn, and after Aaron, we have Natalia Garcia. After the public comments, I also want the Office of Finance and City Attorney and Public Works to step forward so we can have a brief conversation about
Would it be possible for Natalia to go before me?
To what?
Go before me?
So, you called her name first, but can I go before?
Well, okay.
Okay. So I'm not Erin, I'm Natalia. I work at the UCLA Labor Center, and I just want to briefly touch upon some key points that was part of a report written by Jesus Hermosillo, who is a graduate student at the UCLA School of Urban Planning. His report is titled Loncheras, a look at the stationary food trucks of LA. And it's the first ever comprehensive study on the mobile food industry. It's focused on stationary food trucks. These are lunch trucks that operate in one location and remain there during all business hours, and they don't move from one location to another. This mode of operation is one of many differences that set the traditional stationary lunch trucks apart from the new recent phenomenon of the Twitter trucks that are constantly on the go and employ multimedia like Facebook and Twitter to inform their followers of their next stop. The report addresses many of the issues of the mobile food industry and offers policy recommendations on how to solve some of the problems faced by the industry, which include creating a mobile food industry commission that will help develop policy that is just and effective, designing a permit that will allow lunch trucks to park in one particular location for an annual fee. In exchange, lunch trucks would be issued a parking permit that would allow them to park for an extended period of time regardless of time limits and parking meter obligations, with the implication that lunch trucks would have to abide by a distance of where they should park between a brick-and-mortar restaurant, at least 200 feet away from a brick-and-mortar restaurant, and from each other, from one another, so they're not all in one particular location, not more than one lunch truck is right next to another. The commitment by the mobile food industry to work with the Human Relations Commission to assist the city in responding to community concerns and grievances. Another policy recommendation is to improve communication and access. So organizing educational workshops to educate lunch truck operators in law and regulations, and just designing educational programs, expanding the availability of restrooms and waste containers. And just I briefly want to highlight some of the data collected. According to government records in 2009, there were 4,480 food vehicles operating in LA County, and an estimated 2,016 in the city of Los Angeles. One small operation's expenditures alone nearly cost $38,000 a year. And commissary fees and commissaries where each lunch truck is required to park every night. That's where the lunch trucks are cleaned and are stocked every day. So there's a fee that the lunch truck operators have to pay, lunch truck owners have to pay. The other contribution that lunch trucks have to the economy is that they have to pay at least, commissary fees are conservatively estimated at over $75 million in the city of LA and over $170 million in the county. The total payment in taxes and regulatory fees for food trucks each year may reach over $15 million for food trucks in the city and over $35 million in the county. So this is the data that was collected by Jesus Hermosillo. Kind of had to go by quickly.
Thank you. I'm Erin Glenn.
You guys got your agenda item no matter what, huh?
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm Erin Glenn. I'm here from the Asociación de Loncheros, and I'm here in support of the motion. I think it's a very creative way to kind of highlight both the brick and mortar industry as well as the lonchero industry, or catering food truck industry, both the new gourmet trucks and the loncheros that have, been operating in the city for a very long time now. I would also like to ask that the CLA use this study as it is the most comprehensive study of the industry to date. So it's taking both, it's focusing more on the traditional side of the industry, but it's taking information that I think would be beneficial for both the city and the lonchera industry when it comes to creating, comprehensive legislation or motions to, kind of regulate or fix certain issues. I think it's very important to think about the traditional aspects of the industry as they have, been a part of Los Angeles for many, many years now and have evolved. I think, it's wonderful that we have this new facet, these new Twitter trucks, because, they've created a niche and really kind of taken the street food scene to another level, which I think is great. I just don't want, if there indeed is regulation or some kind of regulation for the industry, I really ask that you take into consideration the traditional operators as well as the new operators, because there is a difference in the mode of operation. And so if one side is regulated, the other side could be affected and vice versa. I think that's extremely important. And I would also just like to, ask that you recognize these loncheras as small businesses and, use this study to really see how they actually do contribute to the city of Los Angeles and the communities that they operate in. Thank you.
Okay, Matt Geller.
Hello, I'm with the Southern California Mobile Food Vendors Association, a similar organization to the Lancheros organization, but we have mostly the new gourmet trucks. We've been dealing mostly with the Transportation Committee recently and have been trying to address the issues that have popped up. One of the things that has come to light during the last few months is Section 80.73 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code. This, for 3 decades, has been the regulations for food trucks. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, there was a memo put out to the LAPD that those were no longer to be enforced. The reason why this happened was Section 80.73 B2F was being challenged in court. B2F said that there were time limits, 30 minutes in residential, 60 minutes in commercial. But when the memo went out, it basically said stop enforcing all of 80.73. Things like, how far you can be from an intersection, and one of the big ones, which I support, is you must abide by the street sign. Now, this isn't an 80.69 municipal code ticket where it's just a parking ticket. It's actually a misdemeanor, and you go in front of a judge. So if that was enforced, the things like the 5700 block issue wouldn't have been an issue. Had that been enforced last summer, they would have all had to move down to 58 and 5900. So one of the things that I'd like to see is those regulations enforced, and they don't have to be enforced that much. I mean, even now, I've told all my members 80.73 B2B that says you can't stay longer than the posted sign is going to be enforced, and already in the last 2 weeks, we haven't had any trucks at 5700. They've all moved down to longer, a place where they can legally stay longer. Addressing some of the issues, we've got 91 members, 130 small business owners in the Southern California Mobile Food Vendors Association. They employ 270 people. Wages range from $9 to $12 for cashiers, $1,000 a week for managers and operators. Can I keep going? The commissaries in Los Angeles that service these trucks, that's another 7,000 people employed. This industry is growing, and it's hiring a lot of people, and it's also what we found, like in the Wilshire area, when we did a little survey, people who would normally pack lunches in that area are actually coming down to eat at the truck, so they're becoming involved in commerce. And sometimes they would pack lunches, and sometimes they would just jump in their car and drive somewhere else, because 4 restaurants aren't enough for 5 years at the same area, same place. So we're reducing car trips, reducing pollution, and getting people involved with commerce by having the trucks there.
Okay, thank you all very much. This is actually to promote, the purpose of the motion is to balance the opportunities for brick-and-mortar restaurants. But I don't think we can do an effective job unless we understand the mobile truck food vendors as well. And this is to the CLA. We have to recognize that Los Angeles is extremely diverse, so how we craft this ordinance has to take into consideration the various idiosyncrasies of the community that we're trying to address. In other words, I think we might want to move toward establishing districts with specific provisions within each district to accomplish what is best for that particular community or district. So there are some brick-and-mortar restaurants who aren't affected by truck vendors whatsoever. And there are some that are impacted very heavily by food truck vendors. So we don't need to create laws that benefit the brick-and-mortar restaurants that don't have an issue with food truck vendors. We're trying to target those that do. So we want to look at regional consideration. We want to look at which kinds of benefits can we give to the restaurant owners. We want to look at temporary benefits versus long-term benefits as well. Because if we can solve these problems in other ways, we may not need permanent solutions, but just temporary fixes until we get to a better, more permanent solution. I do want to say there's a lot of great ideas. I was just glancing at the, is this a thesis, a master's thesis? Is that what this is? Yeah. Well, I was glancing at it, and there's some great ideas on here, and we definitely will come back to it to study it. So I think my motion stands as is, but we want to look at each of these ideas that we have, decreasing the business tax rate for restaurants, but I want to clarify that it's for restaurants negatively impacted by the food truck industry. We don't need to spread it across the board where it's not a problem. I believe that we can demonstrate fairly easily if a business is negatively impacted by food trucks. That shouldn't be too difficult, and so we have to create the standards to be able to show that. And if the company, so if he can show that he's had food trucks for X period of time and this kind of impact, then he would qualify for a special tax rate or something like that, and other benefits. Creating a Dine in LA campaign. By the way, have the Troqueros ever done I think it would be great to have you guys at the convention center, and all of the gourmet trucks, the classics, everybody come out, and the city could make some money, and maybe we can put it into a pool to help everybody else. It's just an idea. I had to say it. Allowing restaurants to open up sidewalk cafes. So we put a lot of restrictions on restaurants in doing that. Maybe how are they going to compete? I went home one night, and there was a table and 3 chairs with a lonchero in front of my house selling tacos, which you could see from, I kid you not, like 2 miles down Nordhoff. It was tacos, and I'm looking, and I seen that sign. I said, "Wow, where's that?" And it was right in front of my house. And so I went up to the person. I said, "You can't stay here." And she looked. She said, "Why?" And I said, "Well," I said, "Number one, you're not supposed to do this anywhere, but number two, I'm the councilman." And she looked at me and she goes, in Spanish, she said, oh, yes, I can see. So she left, but the sad thing was, and this is something I want to say to the loncheros. I am a workers' rights guy. And the one thing that I do not countenance, I don't care what community is doing it, is when there's worker abuse. These 2 ladies that were working in this trailer in front of my house, when I told them they had to leave, it took them about an hour to get out of there. The first half hour, they had to wait for the truck to come and pull the trailer. And the next half hour, they had to wait for their husbands to pick them up. And I believe that's worker abuse. I don't know if they were paid for that hour. I doubt that they were, but I won't countenance any troqueros who are not paying legal wages, not providing legal benefits, and I'm not going to set up standards for them that are less than what the legal standards are today. On the other hand, the communities, it's sort of the consumers are saying there's a place for this because they keep coming, and so they speak louder than elected officials. Let's see. So sidewalk cafes are important. It might be a way we provide an incentive at no cost or some reasonable charge that's less than what they would be imposed with now. We need to talk to building and safety about that. The number of jobs that would be created by implementing each of the recommendations, just to get a better understanding. Office of Finance, are you present? Some of the questions I have for you: what taxes are restaurant owners liable for now that we might be able to work with? What business tax classifications are they in? Is there a cap on the amount of taxes they pay? How does this differ from food trucks? We can go into much more detail when the CLA does the report and works with you on that, but if you could just give us a general sense real quick.
Sure. Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance. Just as background, both a brick and mortar restaurant as well as a food truck would be subject to the city's business tax, and that's the gross receipts tax. The entities would pay based on their sales. So there is a business tax that's calculated based on their sales. Their classification would be retail sales. The current tax rate is $1.27 per $1,000 of gross receipts. In addition to the city's business tax, selling food at retail also entails collection of sales tax. So the food trucks as well as the restaurants would be responsible for collecting sales tax on the amount of sales to their customers. So the city does receive their share of the sales tax from the State Board of Equalization. There are no specific incentives that apply only to restaurants, whether it's food trucks or fixed locations. Of course, if they meet the criteria, a restaurant would qualify for the small business exemption as well as the recently modified new business exemption.
Okay, can I just hold you off? I want to point out to the CLA. Have we seen a drop in revenues coming from restaurants?
I don't have that information that we've analyzed.
That's an assumption I'm making, but I believe it to be true, and that is that we've seen a tremendous loss of restaurants in Los Angeles, period. I'm assuming there's a loss in tax revenue. So for us to implement a static rate for businesses when we're losing business, we're not gaining any revenue by maintaining that rate. As we've seen in other industries, and we work with the Office of Finance and Treasurer's Office on this, when we give incentives, the theory is that we will get more revenue because more businesses will be able to stay in the game. So I want to particularly be mindful of that concept and how it might work in this regard. And there may be geographies where they've been more heavily impacted, like and I don't mean to pick one, but like Ventura Boulevard, where we know there's a high concentration of restaurants, maybe that is losing more business than other areas. But on the revenue piece, I'm not sure we're gaining anything by not lowering the tax rates. I think we're losing business. That contributes to the loss of business.
We can certainly provide an analysis in terms of just historical data regarding restaurants.
Well, more than historical data, we also want some models of options that might work.
Well, one of the recommendations that Office of Finance would respectfully make to the committee is that this be tasked to the Business Tax Advisory Committee. For two reasons. Number one, the Business Tax Advisory Committee is currently undergoing review and analysis of a variety of incentives and proposals, but also in looking at the motion does request specific economic analysis, including job forecasting. There is a proposal out there for a analysis of B-tax proposals, and Finance believes that this could be folded into that RFP proposal as far as a successful bidder. Unfortunately, the Office of Finance does not have the economic data nor the resources to conduct economic analysis other than specific tax analysis. But in terms of looking at what would be particular incentives that would be appropriate for the restaurant industry, that would generate jobs, that would generate additional restaurants opening and provide that incentive to the business community, we believe that BTAC would be able to incorporate that within their analysis.
I don't have a problem with that, but I think maybe if we could get a preliminary outline from the CLA as to the issues and then send it to BTAC, I think that would be helpful.
Yes.
Maybe you can work with the CLA to give the questions that we should drive BTAC to make decisions upon. Would
yes,
that be?
Definitely. We could
Okay,
work on
so before we send it directly to BTAC, just based on my motion, if we could have some kind of preliminary document that gives them a little more direction, that would be helpful. And then we'll bring that back to committee, I guess, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Also, if I may, one other recommendation is that the motion be amended to include city attorney. We have had preliminary discussion with city attorney to review any potential impediments to establishing, let's say, different tax rates for restaurants versus other types of retailers. Also, given the comments that the chair referenced in terms of region-specific incentives, we believe that city attorney would need to weigh in on that to ensure that there weren't any impediments or legal hurdles to establishing those types of differential treatment to taxpayers.
That's fine. Thank you. Okay, so you'll continue to work with CLA on this preliminary document, and then we'll send it to BTAC ideally, and then I think that's a good idea.
Yes, we will work with the CLA as well as the other city departments that have been tasked.
Okay, now we have I believe the city attorney and public works department are here to talk specifically about sidewalk cafes.
I'm Ted Jordan, Assistant City Attorney, Public Works General Counsel, and I have representatives from Public Works here.
Good afternoon. I'm Sean Bedin with Bureau of Engineering, Central District.
Wesley Tenenjeri, Bureau of Engineering, and the Bureau of Engineering already has some policies in place that were approved by the Board of Public Works for restaurants, the brick and mortar restaurants that want to put tables and chairs in front of their restaurant, and they have to obtain a permit, a revocable permit, and there are requirements that go along with that, like clearance on the sidewalk, a waiver of damages, and proof of liability insurance. Those are like the minimum requirements for the tables and chairs on the sidewalks.
And okay, when we see the lunch trucks, quite often they have tables and chairs. Do they
Those
have
are not
permits?
permitted by us.
Do any of these lunch trucks have permits to do tables and chairs?
Not to my knowledge, no.
So that would be a disparity in how we treat one versus the other, right?
Correct. Well, yeah. Well, we don't issue permits to the lunch trucks for their tables and chairs.
The permit's issued to the restaurant. It's the property owner there whose property extends out, across the city's right-of-way. So the revocable permit is for the restaurant or the property owner to get that permit to encroach into the right-of-way.
Well, I don't have any question about why you do it on brick and mortar restaurants. I'm just saying that the city is contributing to an imbalance in the economic forces because lunch trucks often have tables and chairs infringing on the right-of-way, and we're not imposing the same steps on them. So that's why I say it's something that we need to consider. I think one of our primary functions as a city is to encourage positive economic development. And sometimes we forget that because of the rules that we're just blinded by the rules. We implement the rules, but we forget the overall mission, which is to promote a good economic environment. Of course, public safety reigns supreme, but we have to correct economic imbalances, and that's one that I see that's very glaring. By the way, we talk about the lunch trucks. The next wave is the little taco vendors. They're not even trucks. They're just They're just on every corner, practically every corner in my district, and we're not even touching that issue. That's the next master's thesis that we need. So what I'm saying is we have an inequity. We have an inequity, and we have to deal with it. And I want to deal with it in a way that recognizes the challenges that a brick and mortar restaurant has when they can't put. And by the way, that Menchie's and the Menchie's did have actually sidewalk tables, but the truck did too. And I know that they didn't have to pay for it, and yet Menchie's probably did. So those kinds of inequities. They cause the public to, first of all, say, what is the city doing? And secondly, it's just not fair. It's just not creating fair competition. And that's why we see a growth in the food truck industry and a diminution of brick and mortar restaurants. Think about it. There's a lot of reasons, but part of it is that we've created a sort of, and maybe for all the right reasons, but nevertheless, we've created an imbalance in the equity there. So all I'm going to ask you is if you could work with the CLA, if we could, I'm tipping you off, we need to do something about that inequity. If there's some way that we can deal with that, and I'm seeing it as a potential incentive that could reduce the burden on those businesses that are negatively impacted by food trucks that are doing the exact same thing, putting the chairs and tables on the sidewalk without Public Works permitting, and then restaurants that are in the same, right in front of them, can't do the same thing because you can track them down that much easier. So anyway, if you just work with the CLA as we do this preliminary report that we intend to pass on to BTAC to do a more complete analysis, that would be very helpful.
Certainly.
Yeah. And any other ideas you come up with? Street use might have a lot of ideas on this subject. How you guys see things out there, or the street use folks see things out there that we haven't seen, and maybe they can help us as well.
We can certainly include street services in the discussion.
Sure.
As,
Get the commissioner involved.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, we're approving item number 1 to go to council.
Yeah, we're approving item number 1 with an amendment to say that we were asking for a tentative report from the CLA with the intention of referring the entire, the tentative report to BTAC, should it be approved by this committee. Is that acceptable to the members?
Yeah, I had a couple of things I'd like to ask to the report back.
And we're adding the city attorney also.
Yeah, let me just ask if in the report back, if we can include a couple of things. One of the things when we use the generic term of brick and mortar restaurants, are we distinguishing from sit-down restaurants versus fast food restaurants? And I just wonder if that was the intent of the motion, to make that kind of distinction.
I didn't want to make a distinction. Okay. Do you?
Well, the thing we do, because we are over-concentrated in fast food, and so we're looking at incentives for sit-down restaurants.
Can we look at both?
Both, yeah.
We can look at both as long as we make that distinction. That would be fine.
So that would be something I'd ask, that we look at both. The other issue is, I do believe we need to have that economic impact, because in looking at the issues of a reduction in business tax, it's unclear right now what would replace that revenue, whether there would be other revenue sources that would generate, other than the expectation that more restaurants would do more business. But I would just like to make sure we do have a economic impact, and maybe the newly created CAO unit that does that is the proper place to look at that over time. The other thing is I would think the restaurant, brick and mortar primarily, and new restaurants that are mobile are going to benefit from the recently implemented city business tax waiver for 3 years, and also in the small amount of times that the city does local preferences and use local restaurants as far as its own city business. So those are some small enhancements to would be probably for both brick and mortar and mobile. The other thing is for new business. And then the other issue is when I noticed in the motion, we're talking about Dine Out. I think that's an important program, and also we hope that it get incorporated with the currently existing LA Inc. program. I think they do it every 6 months, so that we make sure that that's not inconsistent. I'd also like to see if the CLA and CAO could give us, I couldn't find the final conclusion on some old CF numbers that dealt with the issue of permitting dining on the public right-of-way, and I think one of them is 08-3167, and the other is a really old one at 05-2034. I don't know whether those have been implemented. The last thing I could find in council file was that they had proposed, but I couldn't find whether the council ever approved the issues. And the final thing I have is that the CRA probably about 2 years ago put together an incentive brochure primarily for the 8th and 9th District to create incentives for both sit-down restaurants and grocery stores. And so if we could have that incorporated to see if those incentives would be available for this, to apply to this motion also.
Mr. Krikorian? CLA?
Yes, well, just in reference to Council File 083167, I believe the city attorney is working on that ordinance.
That hasn't been, okay, I couldn't find it.
We
We proposed a motion, but I couldn't find if it was ever implemented.
Again, Ted Jordan, Public Works General Counsel. 083167, the last action was in May of 2010. We had submitted a draft ordinance on the outdoor dining that would establish an administrative fee. The council direction in May was to instead use a penalty provision so that if a restaurant is in violation, there's a penalty, and there's a increasingly high penalty for a second and third violation. In that revision to the ordinance that council directed us to do in May, we're in the process of doing that now.
But we asked that we not have an administrative fee for the permit, but a penalty if you do it without the permit?
That was my understanding, yes. Yes, and so we're in the process of revising ordinance language to follow that recommendation.
In initiating the permit for the right-of-way, then we're not looking for cost recovery?
No, I believe if the staff can hear, it's a difference in the permit application versus an ongoing administrative fee. I have Wesley Tenantieri here who can explain the current process.
Yeah, the initial application for the sidewalk dining involves a permit fee, and that does not change. What was previously proposed was a biannual, like, renewal fee for the restaurants that would charge them every 2 years a fee for us to look at their dining and do an inspection, and then that was
But that requires you to go to the facility and inspect
correct.
it.
And that's why the additional fee, we were going to charge the additional fee every 2 years to do that. But instead of that, council decided on the penalty fee instead, so there will be no additional administrative fee every 2 years. It'll just be the initial permit fee, and that is good in perpetuity until it's revoked.
Yeah. But that's what I was saying, then your inspection program is basically not funded.
Correct. So they will not go out on a regular basis. The Bureau of Street Services investigators go out on a complaint-based investigation.
So that was one of the concerns, I remember when the fee was created, is that the expectation was you're going to go out and identify these violations that the public constantly are calling us about. But now we're saying we'll only go out for complaints because we got rid of the fee, proposal to get rid of the fee that would allow you to have done the inspections.
Correct. So instead of us going out every 2 years to inspect every single restaurant, inspectors would only go out on a complaint basis.
Just slept that one.
Yeah. And Councilmember Parks, this issue will come back before you when we bring to the council the revised ordinance. And so we can have a more complete discussion of the matter at that time.
Yeah, because the issue, the same personnel in the department are going to be doing both. The original permit, and then they'll be doing the complaint processing.
It's the same department, a separate bureau.
Separate bureau.
Yeah, same department.
I'm assuming that's going to Public Works?
Yes.
Mr. Parks, are you on Public Works?
No.
Can you, as it's going to Public Works Committee, can you make sure that you brief Councilman Parks in case he wants to weigh in at Public Works Committee?
Absolutely. I believe it's going to be actually a status of this will be on the Public Works Committee agenda at their next meeting.
Okay.
So I'll contact your office in advance of that.
And then what about, do you have any update on the 05-2034? That's
yeah, which
That was the previous version of the
or is that
2008, yeah.
Okay,
I think
so it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Krikorian is okay. So we're going to get a preliminary report back that we intend to pass to BTAC. Now, do we have to send this motion to council?
Yes, sir. So they can go ahead and prepare the report. if you approve the motion,
It's instructing them to do the preliminary report, okay, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll send it to council as quickly as possible, hopefully. So when would that be? When would it go to council?
We can schedule it next week, sir. Next.
Oh, that would be
Friday.
great, and then, just because I want to get it to BTAC as quickly as possible, okay?
Yes.
So then theoretically, in 2 weeks, we could bring it back to this committee? Okay. All right,
You want to hear back in 2 weeks?
is that all right, or do you need?
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to work with both associations and the restaurant industry to make sure I get their input, so I may need a little bit more time.
30 days?
I think 30 days would be more appropriate.
Or 4 weeks?
Yeah.
basically? Okay. 4 weeks then, and let us know if you need a little extra time. But I don't want you to go too heavily into it. I just want you to paint the concepts, and then we'll send it to BTAC furthermore, for the greater analysis. Okay. Thank you. Then, without objection, that will be the order. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is a motion, Parks Krikorian, relative to the request for the Business Tax Advisory Committee to look into the creation of a business tax credit for employers who hire disabled and indigent workers. This item was continued from the meeting of September 14th, 2010.
Okay, Mr. Parks and Krikorian introduced this motion, so maybe Mr. Parks, you can tell us what the goal is here.
Basically, what it's looking at is somewhat modeling this ordinance after San Francisco program. San Francisco gives a incentive on payroll tax. We do not have such a tax. So we're looking at how the city might incentivize businesses for hiring people that are viewed as hard to place, such as disabled or those that are having some financial duress. What I'd like to do on the a couple of things on the motion, if we can expand it. Unlike the San Francisco program that deals only in certain areas, such as their enterprise zones, I'd like to make sure our review goes citywide so that it gives an incentive to businesses that would also provide local residents employment as opposed to just any employment. So the two changes would be citywide and also to local residences. And then also, I'd like to make sure that we add the San Francisco plan as part of the council file for reference as relates to where this idea came from. And then finally, that we expand the therefore to include that the CAO-CLA Office of Finance should work with BTAC to evaluate and address this, because BTAC really doesn't have the staff to do this research. And so I've asked that the CAO-CLA and Office of Finance work with them to create a response to this motion.
Okay, I don't have any cards in this matter. It's very self-explanatory. The only thing I would ask is for a clear definition of indigent workers.
The definition of what?
Indigent workers.
I think they put it on the motion.
Is it on the motion?
Do that. On the they put a little double asterisk. I think we used it, came from...
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. John Wickham with the CLA's office.
Yeah.
The ordinance that San Francisco adopted has a definition of indigent, so we can start with that.
Okay, great.
In our analysis.
But I think the CLA, you must have done this for us, to put it in the asterisk on the bottom, that any person who qualifies for and is receiving public assistance under various city, county, and state and federal programs. That's
yeah.
When it was prepared.
Exactly.
Well, frankly, I think that's overly broad.
Yeah,
because I don't know what any means, and I think when they're talking about various, I think they're
we'll go with
they're being specific. So I'm sure San Francisco probably has a better definition.
Okay. Oh yeah, we'll definitely review that ordinance and make sure that it's not overly broad in those issues.
Okay, with no objection, that matter is approved. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is the city clerk report relative to various actions for the proposed South Los Angeles Industrial Tract business improvement.
We have a presentation on this item?
Yes, city clerk.
Why not? You came all this way, spent all this time.
Hello, Miranda Pastor with the City Clerk's Office. This is the South Los Angeles Industrial Type Business Improvement District. This is their third renewal period. They were established for two-year periods, and this time they're renewing for 5 years. We're recommending that the Ops Committee approve this report for reestablishment.
Okay, any objection? Hearing no objection, that matter is approved. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.